Welcome back. Okay, I'm gonna start out with um, talking about stuff that I failed to mention in the first video. The first thing is that at one point, Peter actually reveals his identity to people. He thinks he's losing his spider powers, and he walks into a party with Gwen, her dad, uh, Harry, I think, and MJ, I think maybe even. But then he's holding his Spider-Man mask and he's like, "Hey, listen, I'm Spider-Man, and I'm not gonna be able to be Spider-Man anymore because I'm losing my powers," or something like that. And then he leaves, pretty sure, and everybody's like, "What?" Captain Stacy was like, "Well, he's probably not feeling too well. He probably doesn't know what he's saying or something like that." And after knowing that he did know that Spider-Man and Peter Parker were the same person, uh, makes sense. He would try to, convince them that he's not. Yeah, so Peter did that, and then that's why he asked the favor of the Prowler, like I said in the first video. So that's that. The next thing, and this is a pretty big thing, I completely glossed over the Six Arms saga. I did mention briefly Morbius, but I really didn't talk about the Six Arms saga at all. So, gonna have to do that now. Basically, Peter wants to eliminate his spider powers, so he comes up with some kind of a formula and drinks it, and instead of taking away his powers, it gives him 4 extra arms. He calls up Dr. Connors, who you may know as the Lizard, and he asks him for a favor. He needs a place to stay, use some lab equipment and stuff. So Connors sets him up at his house in the Hamptons so Spider-Man can work and, try and figure out some way to fix whatever happened. So that's when Morbius washes up on the beach after this whole big massacre thing on a boat that he was on. So yeah, he washes up on a beach and then he finds Dr. Connor's house, and he hides out in the attic while the sun's coming up. So because he gets weak during the day because he's a vampire. So then Dr. Connors shows up while Morbius is fighting Spider-Man, he wants his blood because he's a vampire. And Dr. Connors shows up and he's all freaked out and turns into the Lizard because it's like agitation makes it happen. And then Morbius fights the Lizard because he wants to feed on Spider-Man's blood, and Lizard is getting in the way of that because Lizard wants to kill Spider-Man. He doesn't want Morbius to kill him. So they have a big fight, and eventually Morbius bites the Lizard and then just leaves because he wants to find other people to feed on. Then it does something. It half changes the Lizard back into Connor. Like, it changes him halfway, and then he turns back into the Lizard, but then he still has Dr. Connor's mind. Because usually what happens is Dr. Connor will turn into the Lizard, and then the Lizard will have a mind of his own, and he always has this plan to, turn all the reptiles on the earth into his minions, and, it would be pretty bad. So yeah, then in this part, he has Connor's mind in the Lizard body, so it's pretty crazy. And basically, long story short, Spider-Man and the Lizard track down Morbius, and they take some of his blood and they mix it with this serum that they made, and they inject themselves, and Connors turns back into Connors, and Spider-Man ungrows his arms recede into his body again. So everybody's all back to normal, and it's all good. But that was a pretty awesome story. pretty decent writing and everything. So yeah, that was pretty good. And another thing that I'm mentioning mostly because it comes into play in this next year of issues, but also because it reinforces something I said in the last video. Yeah, I said that Aunt May was taken hostage by Doc Ock in the first annual, and she, was like, "Hey, you're such a nice man," and so later, she actually takes him in. He rents a room from her, and yeah, because Peter moves out to get his own apartment when he's in college, and so Dr. Octopus comes in and rents from Aunt May. Yeah. And Peter doesn't like that too much. And another thing, this really doesn't come into play very much, but it's just, another villain that I don't really care for. The Beetle. Apparently, he was a Fantastic Four villain before he was in Spider-Man, because the Human Torch mentions that he fought him before, and now the Beetle comes back and he's trying to fight him, and Spider-Man gets tangled up with him, and the Beetle's like holding Aunt May hostage or something like that. So pretty crazy stuff. And yeah, again, I didn't like the villain at all. Like, I never really like him because he has a pretty stupid costume, and he's not really all that great. But the issue itself wasn't that bad. I actually enjoyed it, but I don't know. I guess maybe that's good writing, but yeah. And another thing that does come into play in this next series of issues is, in the previous video I failed to mention that Harry actually got into drugs, pills. Apparently, like, he'd been taking pills, for all kinds of stuff, like pills to go to sleep, pills to stay awake, and pills to do whatever. Then he actually buys some pills from, like, this drug dealer, and then he takes some, and he has a really bad trip and, like, falls on his bed or falls on the couch or something like that. Peter comes home and finds him, and then he sends him to the hospital. So then Harry comes back at some point from the hospital. That's why he's... Anyway, enough said. This is now the 1972 review. Alright, now, at this point, Stan Lee is no longer writing the issues. Like, he wrote or at least had a hand in the story of every single issue up to this point, but Stan Lee is now not writing, he's only the editor. And Roy Thomas has come in as the writer, and, I guess after writing 100 issues, Stan Lee just kind of needed a break. But yeah, he comes back for issue 105, but then he leaves completely for 112. So, yeah. And I gotta say that when Stan Lee is not part of the writing process, it's not that great. It definitely is some of the lesser stuff. Because, yeah, it starts off with the continuation of the King Kong ripoff that I mentioned in the last video. Jameson takes Peter and Gwen Stacy to this island in Antarctica that's supposedly, like, a tropical jungle in the middle of, freezing cold climate, and like there's some monster in the wilderness, and so yeah, the previous issue ended with Spider-Man stuck in quicksand, and so then this one starts out with him in quicksand, and yeah, then he gets out and fight this big monster, and Spider-Man traps him in the quicksand, and they have to fight Kraven the Hunter. Apparently he's behind it all, and they use the help of Kazar, which I don't really like Kazar at all, really, because he's kind of more or less like a George of the Jungle type, but doesn't really work for me in the Spider-Man universe. And, I don't even really care for Kraven the Hunter that much, but he does wear a lion's head for a vest, and I think that pretty much makes you the coolest person ever. But one thing I'm surprised about is that he was the most requested villain to come back for, like, he comes back in a later issue, but it says somewhere that he was the most requested villain, and it really kind of surprises me because there are a lot of other villains that I would have thought would be more requested. Like, Sandman hasn't really made many appearances, because he's only been in maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 tops. I think it would be cool to see some more Sandman. One thing about Kraven is that now he's using weapons. Like, the eyes on the lions on his vest, they shoot out lasers, and he uses, like, gas and, like, all this other stuff. And I really think that he would just stick to his bare hands, because I think he's a little too prideful to use weapons. A little too overconfident in his own abilities. But maybe he just likes to win more. And also, there's a Spider Slayer that comes into play right after the King Kong storyline. Smythe, or Smith, however you pronounce it, he has made 2 robots before for Jameson to control, to try and capture and defeat Spider-Man. And other times they have failed. And this time he makes a Spider Slayer that is made to look like a spider. And it does a pretty decent job of, keeping Spider-Man on his toes. But then Smythe uses it. Jameson thinks he's controlling it, but he's really not, because Smythe is actually controlling it from his laboratory, and he steals something, master control, something or other, and then he leaves with the Spider Slayer. Like, he makes the Spider Slayer go away. And, yeah, so he basically wants to control the crime in the city, like every villain does, pretty much. And he's designed this thing for the New York Police Department where it's a bunch of cameras on rooftops, and so basically he uses them to tell the robbers, like, where the police are and what route to take to escape from a bank robbery and stuff like that. And yeah, and then he also creates a much bigger Spider Slayer, and he actually makes a big web across, might be 2 buildings, I can't remember, but basically Spider-Man gets stuck in it, and then this big Spider Slayer thing comes crawling down, and they really have it out, and it's pretty epic, to be honest. And it would be extremely cinematic. I think it would probably make a really awesome movie. Yeah. enough said. Another thing, Flash went off to Vietnam. Like, he got drafted or something like that. Or he just, signed up. He left for Vietnam a little while ago, and he comes back every now and then. But it's kind of funny and also kind of sad how, like, in the beginning, before he actually went out to Vietnam, they would joke around about him winning the war single-handedly and, like, all that stuff, and, we all know how that turned out. But yeah, he would come back every so often, and he would always hate on Peter Parker. He would be like, hey, I see Puny Parker's still here, and, but now he comes back from the war for good. Like, he's completed his service and he's back. And then there's this storyline where he has a price on his head from something that happened in Vietnam, and I think it was pretty cool. You have all these, like, Vietnamese people trying to kill him, and he's, Spider-Man's trying to save him and all that stuff, and it was pretty neat. But the ending of that storyline was kind of lame, a little bit. Basically, Doctor Strange comes in and helps Spider-Man find Flash, and first of all, I find Doctor Strange to be very cheesy, and I really just don't ever like it when he's in these comics, because it's just, I don't know, it's not, he's really cheesy, like, really pretty cheesy. Yeah, so the ending of it is, like, these, apparently, Flash was separated from his platoon, and he wanders into this lost temple that nobody knows of, and it's not on the map or anything, and the people there take care of him, and then he goes back to his platoon, and they say they're going to bomb this Sector B, and he's like, no, you can't do that because there's a temple there, and they're like, yeah, right, whatever, you're delirious. And then he runs back to warn them, and the bombing happens, and then he thinks that they're dead and everything, but it turns out they're not dead, like, they didn't die. All the other people who were in the temple, like, who were friends of the high priest or whatever, like, they want revenge on him. They think that if he dies, then the high priest will come back to life or something, because he's in a trance. And so the ending is just Doctor Strange brings him out of the trance, because apparently, to avoid getting killed in the bombing, the high priest put himself into some kind of a mystic trance to not die, and then he sent out a signal to Doctor Strange to have him come over and get him out of it. So yeah, that was the end, and it was really kind of anticlimactic. And again, Spider-Man makes a web version of himself to try and fool people. Basically, him and Gwen are at this place where Flash is being held by the military to be protected from the Vietnamese guys, and then Flash gets kidnapped and taken away, but Peter can't leave because Gwen is right there, and she really doesn't want him to just skip out like he always does. So basically what he does is he makes a web version of himself, puts it in his civilian clothes, and then holds it while he's swinging out as Spider-Man, and it makes people think that he's been kidnapped by Spider-Man. And yeah, so that's that. And then another thing that I noticed is when Peter Parker is, like, crawling around on walls or something like that, but not dressed as Spider-Man, like when he's just doing it as Peter Parker, he takes off his shoes and socks, which I find interesting. Like, because it does make sense. Like, that he would need his feet exposed to, be able to cling on to a wall. Or, like his Spider-Man costume is probably thin enough that, it still works. But, like, if you've seen the Raimi movie in the first one, like, you see, like, the close-up of his fingers and, like, those things are coming out, and, like, that's what makes it grab onto the wall. But he has shoes on while he's climbing up the wall in that movie. And I always thought, like, I don't know if that would necessarily work with the shoes, but I guess maybe he's just pulling himself up by his hands and he's not really, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that's what it is, but, I think to have his feet also do that, he would need the shoes off. And I noticed in issue number 110, Peter leaves his apartment after, like, waking up from, like, a big battle, and, like, he was really tired and stuff, and then he leaves his apartment, and there's a note addressed to Peter sitting beside the phone, and nobody mentions it. Like, it's just sitting there, and, like, I remember thinking, like, what's up with that? And why isn't Harry telling him that the note's there, or why isn't he seeing that there's a note there for him? And then in the next issue, 111, Spider-Man swings in and finds the note and reads it, and it says that Aunt May left, like, went away somewhere, and she's not going to tell him where, and tells him, like, to not come looking after her. So, of course, he spends all of his time then trying to find her. And I found the storyline about the rivalry between Dr. Octopus and Hammerhead to be, like, the only crime lord in the New York or whatever. I think that would make a great movie. Because the first few issues of the story, because it spreads over multiple issues because it's such a long thing, but like, the first few issues were pretty good, and like, not nothing, like, too great, but, like, they were pretty good. But the final one, like, the last issue of it, which was also the last issue that I read, it was the final battle, and it was in Doc Ock's mansion, and it was pretty awesome. Like, it was really, really awesome. And there's, like, this haunting image of, like, these men in gas masks and, like, wearing, like, these, like, the suits that you would associate with, like, a gas mask. They were just, like, moving forward towards Hammerhead's crew as they were, like, shooting at him and stuff, and, like, there was, like, this gas, like, building up around, and it was just, like, really pretty crazy. And then when Spider-Man finds Aunt May staying there, like, Aunt May is staying there with Doc Ock of her own free will. Like, she went there to stay with him, apparently on some job thing, like, she went to, like, an employment agency or something like that, and, so she's just chilling with Doc Ock, best buds, and he says, I think at one point, that he's in love with her, and that makes Spider-Man really upset, and, he starts, like, pounding the crap out of Doc, and, really lets him have it, and then Aunt May pulls out a gun and aims it at Spider-Man and says, "Don't move," and then she actually fires a shot at Spider-Man for beating up Doc Ock. And it's just like, that is pretty crazy stuff. But yeah, then there's also these things that Doc Ock's henchmen have that are strength-enhancing harnesses, and those were pretty cool. They just added, like, a neat look to the suit, and obviously, gave him, like, super strength. So yeah, that was a cool, neat little gadget. The artwork, for issue number 105 specifically, not any of the other ones, just 105, it was pretty awful. Like, really, really awful. Like, Aunt May looks like a gremlin. Not even exaggerating, she looks like a gremlin. And something's wrong with Gwen Stacy's face. Like, she has these huge lips that, like, take up half of her face. And, like, something's wrong with her cheeks. And, like, everything. And, like, MJ, something's wrong with her. Her face is, like, all smushed or something. Like, something's seriously wrong here. And the art was done by Gil Kane. So, I'm watching you. But yeah, speaking of the history of the artwork for the series, it started out with Steve Ditko. You know, he did a pretty good job, but him and Stan Lee had a falling out, and so then Joe Romita was brought in to do the artwork, and he's definitely my favorite so far. One thing I'm wondering about is when they will finally drop the webbing, like, in the underarm area. Like, it was much worse when Steve Ditko was doing it, because the webbing was huge. Like, it went from Spider-Man's elbow, you know, up to, like, his rib cage, and it was just like this net in under both of his arms, and it was kind of ridiculous. And then when Joe came in, he made it a lot smaller, and it's better, but I still just don't like it at all. And I have seen some shots of Spider-Man where it doesn't exist, like, it's just not there, but it always comes back. It's always like a little, you know, it's always there at some point later. So I'm just wondering, you know, when it's going to be gone for good, because I know at some point, like, I've seen newer issues, and I've seen all these newer pictures and everything, and the webbing's just gone. So I know at some point that it leaves forever. And I'm just wondering when that happens. Let's go on to characters. One thing, just in general, Peter Parker is just a pretty decent guy. Like, he's really good. He's always thinking of himself as too selfish. You know, he's always like, I'm so selfish for wanting, you know, all this stuff. Even when he's not being selfish, he still thinks of himself as selfish. And he's always constantly thinking of the benefit of other people, and, you know, trying to make other lives better. And in fact, you know, sacrificing his own happiness just so that other people can, you know, have a better life. You know, just being Spider-Man and not telling him. You know, screws up his life, but he has to do it. And he's always trying to make Aunt May happy and keep her from being too lonely or too worried. You know, it's just a good guy. But I am a little upset because in the one issue, there's this guy that Spider-Man meets, and his name is Martin Blank, and, like, he's just like an ugly guy that looks like a chimp, and he grew up in an orphanage and nobody would ever adopt him, and so, you know, he's grown kind of bitter and stuff over the years, and he tried to join a circus, and he had this gibbon costume, which is, you know, like just a monkey, but he had this costume, and, you know, then he left the circus because, you know, all they wanted was just a guy who looked like a chimp, and they didn't want him to do all this acrobatic stuff that he could do. And so he meets up with Spider-Man in the suit, and he's like, hey, can I join with you and, you know, be a superhero with you? And Spider-Man just laughs in his face, and he's just like, are you kidding me? Like, no, there's no way. Like, you're a joke or something like that. And it was just, you know, it seemed a little too harsh. Like, you know, he's been through a lot, and it seems kind of mean to just, laugh in his face. He could have. The least he could do is, Spider-Man could just say like, "All right, listen, I'm kind of like my own thing. Like I don't really want a partner right now. Like I just want to, you know, fight crime on my own because that's how I work. Something like that. Or, like I don't know. It just seemed very mean. And later, when Aunt May is kidnapped, um, well, not when Aunt May is missing. He's trying to find her. Like Spider-Man's just looking for her, like constantly. And then at one point he hears this guy screaming, and he looks over, and it's like some guy shaking down another guy, like holding him out the window, like trying to get money out of him. So he thinks about helping him. He's like, maybe I should go help him. But like this guy is like shooting a gun out the window or something at him, and he's like, well, I'm not gonna be able to win this one, so I'm just gonna forget it. I'm just gonna leave. He's like, and if I help this guy, it's gonna take time away from looking for Aunt May, and it's just like you don't even know that Aunt May is in any danger at all. Like she wrote you a note saying she left. I mean, she left of her own free will. She's gone, like, just because she wanted to leave. She's not, it's not like there was a ransom note. Like, it's, I don't know, it just seemed not good, And also, J. Jonah Jameson is a pretty horrible human being. Like, that's pretty much the size of it. He's constantly swindling people out of money, and on at least 10 different occasions, he will pay somebody for a service or a product, and then he'll think later, like, haha, joke's on him, I would have paid twice as much. And it's usually with Peter for the pictures that he takes. But yeah, he's pretty much greed incarnate. And in issue 112, he actually yells at Peter for not bringing him photos, even though he knows that Peter's aunt is missing and that he's upset about it and everything. Like, Peter's aunt has just gone missing, and Jameson's like, why haven't you brought me any photos? Like, it's just like, okay, listen, he's kind of having a rough time right now. Like, give him a break. And also, Peter really doesn't like MJ at all. Like, she will hit on him, and he'll brush her off completely. Like, he'll just be like, listen, I'm with Gwen. Like, you're not gonna, get any. And he's just really in love with Gwen and doesn't want anything to do with MJ. I mean, if I was reading this, I never would have guessed that Peter and MJ would get married someday. And yeah. So go figure. Yes, maybe that's just life. And speaking of Gwen Stacy, Gwen is a champ. She always defends Peter, and she's extremely loyal, and she loves him completely. She finally told off Flash, like, who, Flash would always, like, be insulting Peter behind his back or in front of his back, and, Gwen would be like, listen, stop it, like, stop picking on Peter. And, he does it this one time. He's like, hey, did you hear that Peter got a stomach ulcer? Ha, what a joke. And, she's finally like, listen, I told you to stop it, so, leave me alone forever. And so, she's yelling at him, and he's like, ugh. I'd say she's pretty close to perfect. Like, she's, yeah. I'm really not looking forward to her death. I've realized that in a lot of ways, I am like Peter Parker, or, similar. Um, the Parker luck, as he calls it, where he, just can't catch a break. And frustrations with situations that aren't going well, and try to do what's right. Sometimes it turns out wrong. Sometimes upsetting people inadvertently, it's just you're really not trying it, but, you just end up upsetting people, and it's just not what you're trying to do. And constantly having girls on the mind, and, Peter's always thinking why can't I get Gwen Stacy out of my mind? And, he's just constantly thinking about her, and, happens to me all the time. And, he messes things up with women a lot, and, yep, that's me. Don't know how, but it happens. And one thing I love about Spider-Man is there are a bunch of times when he considers purposefully doing the wrong thing. He'll be on his way out the door, holding some money, or, stealing some money, and then he's like, wait, I can't do this. This isn't right. So he puts it back. And, sometimes he'll consider not helping somebody because they haven't been nice to him, somebody like Flash or Jameson or something. But, then he's like, I gotta do it. So he helps him anyway because it's the right thing to do. And, it just, shows that he is very flawed, and, he always ends up doing the right thing in the end, though. A lot of superheroes tend to not be very flawed. They're usually, super, And, he actually struggles with good and evil in his own mind, as well as, battling evil on a physical level in the form of supervillains. So, it really makes him a lot more human than most of the other superheroes out there. And I just think that's pretty cool. And lastly, the fact that Peter Parker manages to go to school, and when he's at home, he's always studying and getting homework done, and he's just constantly studying, and but then he also spends hours and hours of his time being Spider-Man and helping people. It really kind of makes me feel like a lazy jerk, to be honest. Because, I guess he does also, several times, his grades slip because he's too busy being Spider-Man, so, maybe it's not. Anyway, yeah, so the next video will be 1973, which is also bound to have some crazy issues, just like this year had. What?